Well, find my notes here. Narcissism. It's a grandiose sense of self-importance. It includes a need for excessive admiration and a lack of empathy for others. Now, if you don't know where the word comes from, it comes from a Greek mythology character whose name was Narcissus. Maybe you've heard the story of Narcissus. Maybe the picture up there looks familiar to you. Narcissus was the son of the Greek river god and a river nymph. And he was extremely good looking. Everybody who saw him fell in love with him. And one day, as he was kneeling down to get a drink out of a still pool of quiet water, he saw his own reflection and was mesmerized by it. He fell in love, and he wouldn't leave the pool. Now, depending on the version of the story you read, either he rotted away there and turned into a flower, because there is a flower named after him, or he was committed suicide because he couldn't have the person in the reflection. Now, it depends on which version of the story you read, but both of those are out there. And so that's where narcissism comes from, that grandiose sense of self-importance. Now, I used to read the Fraz cartoon. I haven't looked at it for years. I don't know if it's still out there. He's a great philosopher. If you don't know Fraz, he is a school janitor, elementary school janitor, who made millions doing other things, and now he just loves to spend time with kids, and so he works at the school. The smartest kid in school is a kid named Caulfield, who never does his homework, but he knows more that he's always a step ahead of the teacher. And here's a cartoon from Fraz a few years ago. He writes up on the board, narcissism, noun, whatever I want the definition to be. The teacher says, Caulfield, I didn't even put that word on the vocabulary list. And he said, oh, is this all about you now? I think that's funny. You know how many narcissists it takes to screw in a light bulb? Just one. He holds it while the world revolves around him. You know, most of us are not narcissistic in a clinical sense, but all of us are to some degree. All of us want our plans. We want our agenda. We want it our way. And so all of us are that way to some degree. We want our plans. The religion of men is all about us. It's all about our agenda. It's all about our plans. It's all about what we want. But the true religion of Jesus is about his plans, about his agenda, about his design. The religion of men is personal plans over divine design. But the true religion of Jesus is all about God and his plans, his design. And Jesus tells us a story that helps us see that truth in the book of Matthew. It's in Matthew chapter 22, the first 14 verses. It's called the parable of the wedding feast. The parable of the wedding feast. If you've been with us at all, you know we've been doing a series for a number of weeks now about the religion of Jesus and the religion of men. And we have seen through this period, as we've gone through Matthew's chapters 20, 21, and 22 now, that there are a lot of stories that point out the differences between how men view religion and the true religion of Jesus. And today we come to almost the last message. We'll conclude this series next week. We have seen how the religion of men is about status and position rather than character and service. We have seen how the religion of men is about human proprieties. It's about the words we say rather than what's really in the heart. But the religion of Jesus is about those other things. Today we're going to see the religion of Jesus is all about God's design and God's plan rather than ours. And this really gets at the heart of every other difference between these two. And so I want you to hear this story. It's in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 to 14. I'm going to read the whole story to you before we begin to work on it together. It's about a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. Listen to the story. Again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those who were invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my Fat calves have been slaughtered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention. They went off, one to his farm and another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, "The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go, therefore, into the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you can find." And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all they found, both bad and good. And so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And he was speechless. And the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen." I want you to think about this story for a minute. First of all, the king gives a wedding feast for his son. Notice that it is a king. There's another parable Jesus tells about a banquet. It's different than this one. This one is about a king, and that is very important because royal weddings are important. They're always a big deal, aren't they? Royal weddings are a big deal, and this was going to be a big deal. This may have been the social event of the year in the country or the city or the area that we are talking about. It's a huge thing. Everyone wants to be there when you have this kind of event. And by the way, in that culture, the focus of attention for a wedding was not the bride, it was the groom. A little different than the way our weddings are, but that's the way they did it. The focus of attention was the groom. And that makes this event even a bigger event because it's the king's son that we're talking about. And so everyone wants to come and celebrate the wedding because that's what royal weddings are about. And invitations were sent out. They were probably highly coveted. To get an invitation from the king would be quite an honor. And so the invitations were sent out. Usually in this culture, invitations were sent out without a specific date. Be ready, it's coming. They weren't as tied to calendars as we were. And then servants would go out and say, "Now that it's prepared, come to the wedding feast." And so invitations would go out to be ready, and then the actual timing would bring in the actual invitation to come. And so the summons went out to those whom the king had already invited. But guess what? They didn't come. They wouldn't come. Now, that is rather absurd. This is the surprise in the story. And sometimes when Jesus tells a story, it's the surprise that's supposed to teach us something. They wouldn't come. It just seems absurd. It wouldn't happen in that culture. You just don't say no to a king. And yet, in Jesus' story, that's exactly what was happening. It would be considered an insult to be invited to a king's event, particularly a son's wedding, and to say no to that invitation. That is an insult to the king. And that's how probably it was taken. But this king was gracious. And so he sent out a second summons. He said, "It's all ready. Come." Verse 4. Again, he sent other servants saying, "Tell those who are invited, I've prepared my dinner. So come." He said it was all prepared for them. "I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered. Everything is ready. Come to the feast." Everything was prepared. There was nothing they had to do but come. The meat had been butchered. All the side dishes were ready, I'm sure. He had gone to great lengths to make sure his anticipated guests would have a good time. He said, everything is ready. All you have to do is just come. But still, they said no. Now, the listeners to Jesus' story, to them, this would have been a completely unthinkable thing. It just did not happen. You don't say no to the king. And yet that's the way that Jesus' story is going. And it's no wonder that it says in verse 7 that the king sent soldiers to kill those people, particularly because some of them murdered his own servants. Verse 7 is an interesting verse because a lot of people have pointed to that verse, and this story gets criticized, that there's no way Jesus would have told a story like this because not going to a wedding shouldn't be a capital offense. But there's no evidence this was never not a part of the story in all the manuscripts. The argument misses the cultural context. Because again, in that cultural context, saying no to that invitation was pretty much tantamount to treason. No, I'm not going to do what the king says. I have my own agenda. I don't want his plans. I want mine. And that in that culture would be tantamount to treason. So it's no wonder the king reacted the way that he did. They still said no. You see, some of them simply had their own agendas. Listen to what they say. Verse 5, they paid no attention. They went off, one to his farm and another to his business. They had farms and businesses that needed attention. Now, those are good things. And farms and businesses can't be neglected very long. If you're in your own business, you know that to be true. And so these were necessary things that had to be done. There were things that couldn't wait long. But skipping one day of work for a king's plan wasn't going to hurt them. And yet that's what they wouldn't do. They told the king he was not important. They told the king's son, you're not important. Your agenda doesn't matter to me. My taking care of my business and my farm is what matters to me. Some of them simply had their own agenda. Some of them actually hated the king's plans. They had no excuses like the first ones. They just didn't want to be a part of the king's party. They just simply said no, and they mistreated his servants and even killed some of them. Wow. If just saying no to the king doesn't sound like treason to you, maybe killing off his messengers does, because that's what it is. And by the way, again, it's a no wonder that verse 7 is in there. Some people criticize verse 7, saying there's no way the king, when he had a feast prepared, would have taken time to send out an army and kill off these people. Well, it doesn't say he did it immediately. He could have done it a few days later. It's just put in the story there to know the outcome of those people. And so it does fit the story. It fits the cultural context so well. These people were saying, it's not about the king's agenda, it's what I want. And I don't want the king's agenda. I want my own plans. So the king did something really interesting. He invited a second set of guests to the wedding. The feast was ready. The invited guests weren't coming. You couldn't delay it. He couldn't just say, go put it in the fridge and we'll do it another day. They didn't have such things. When food was cooked, it had to be eaten. And so the feast was ready, and this is what the king said. He said, just go out on the street and invite anyone you can find. That is a move of total grace. Because no one just walking on the street would have been worthy of an invitation. And yet, that's exactly what this king did. Can you imagine visiting London and being out there where you can see Buckingham Palace and you're waiting for the changing of the guard and the soldier comes up to you and says, hey, the Queen's invited you to dinner, come on in. Your first thing would be, this is not true. This is a joke. But the more they insisted, you begin to think, why? Why me? This is a move of complete grace. And that's exactly what happened with this king. He just went out on the street and said, come on in. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if you're good or bad. Just come to the feast and enjoy it. Wow, that's an incredible picture of grace, isn't it? And so they came in and they had their wedding feast. But as the story goes on, one of the men there was not in proper clothes. Now, wait a minute, some people say. If they just went out and picked up people off the street, you wouldn't expect them to be in proper clothes. So why is this a problem? Well, a number of commentators pointed out that there are some of the ancient commentators on the scriptures who said it was not uncommon in that culture for a very wealthy person or a king to actually supply the robes that were to be worn at a big party that he was putting on. Now think about that for a minute. If in this story the event was that the king was supplying the robes, the wedding clothes for the guests, and someone came in off the street and he didn't change into the clothes that he was given, this guy is every bit as guilty. His situation is every bit as absurd as those that said no to the invitation. Yeah, I'm going to accept your invitation, but I'm not going to accept your clothes. I want to do it my way. I'm not going to do it your way. And he is every bit as guilty as the first ones were. And it's no wonder it says to cast him out, because he didn't want to come on the king's agenda. He wanted to come on his own. Now, that's the whole story. And I want to take just an aside to mention, I recognize that this is another parable that was teaching the Jewish religious leaders that the kingdom of God was being taken away from them and given to Gentile people, given to someone else. I recognize that in the context, it's what the last parable meant. If you were here last week, the parable of the tenants or the parable of the 10 ants, as we kind of laughed about last week. Some of the same parallels where God sent messengers and they were killed off, and God gave other chances and they wouldn't accept it, and so on. I understand that that's one of the main points that Jesus is making in this parable. But there are so many other applications to the series that we're doing that's what I want to focus on today. And so set that aside just for a minute and think about the relevance of this story to what we've been talking about in terms of the religion of men and the religion of Jesus. The religion of men says personal plans are more important than God's plans. More important than the divine agenda is my agenda. That's what the religion of men says. The religion of Jesus is all about the king, and it's all about his plans. And of course, we know that Jesus is the king. This difference is at the heart of every other difference that we've looked at this entire series. This gets down to the core of what this whole series is about. It's about, is it my religion? Or is it Jesus' religion? Is it about me? Does it revolve around me? Or is it about Jesus? Does it revolve around him? That's the core of absolutely everything that we've looked at. The religion of men is about status. It's about position. It's about what I say. It's about what I can get out of it. It's about what I own. But the religion of Jesus is about stewardship of God's things. It's about what he wants inside our hearts. It's about our character. It's about us serving others rather than all those things. You see the difference? This gets at the very core of what this whole series was about. It also gets down to the heart of why people can receive such an amazing invitation from God and simply say no. It gets to the heart of that issue as well. And that's what I want to think about here for a minute. You know, God's invite is one of total grace. He invites us, who in no way deserve it, to come to the wedding celebration of his Son. We are undeserving. We are opposed to him at times. We have thoughts and words that are opposed to him. And yet, out of grace, he invites us to the wedding supper of his Son. It's completely undeserved. And he invites us to a feast that is an eternal feast in his kingdom without sorrow or tears or sickness or death. That is an amazing invitation. And that's the invitation that God extends. And yet, still, people say no. They still refuse it. It's absurd, but it's true. In fact, only a few people respond. That's why I believe it says, for many are called, but few are chosen, and however you interpret that in your theological perspective, it fits mine perfectly, of course, but however you interpret that, I think it does tell us that there are a lot that say no and very few that say yes. That just seems absurd. This is not just a made-up story. It is. Jesus made the story up, but he made it up because it teaches us that absurdity, that that's what true life is. You can't turn on the TV or see an advertisement on the internet or anywhere else without this coming through. Because everything you read and see says, have it your way, or go your own way, or look out for number one, or do your own thing. It's all about you. Everything you see in the advertisements, it's all about you. That's the way the world thinks. That's the way the world wants us to think. That's the way the world is. But God says, I give you a free invitation. Come and accept it. Why people don't respond to such an amazing invitation, I think the story gives us some hints. And I want to talk about 4 reasons why people don't respond to that amazing invitation. Number 1, some people don't come because they're doing good things already. Here the people in this story said they were too busy with their farms and their businesses. And people in our world are too busy with their farms, with their businesses, with their school, with their pursuits, with their family, with whatever else you can put in there. They're all good things. But so often the good is the worst enemy of the best. Because the best thing is the king's agenda, not ours. And those things can be an enemy to the king's agenda. One commentator said, it's too easy to get so busy with the things of time we forget the things of eternity. Another said it even more succinctly this way: we get so busy making a living, we neglect to make a life. Wow. We get so busy making a living, we neglect to make a life. It's so easy for that to happen, for what we see as the necessary good things in our life to push out the best thing in our life. People refuse to give up their good thing, even faced with an amazing invitation. But God patiently sends more messengers. He patiently continues to invite. And that's the incredible grace of God. God is not slow about his promise, as some men count slowness, but he's patient towards you, not wishing for any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. God is patiently inviting people to come. And even though they say, no, I've got too many other things going on, he continues graciously to invite. Number 2, some people don't come because they simply don't want to hear the invite. If you've ever shared the gospel, you know this happens. There are some people who simply don't want to hear about it. You can say it's all prepared, it's a wonderful invite, it's a wonderful feast, he takes care of everything. They just don't want to hear it. They just don't want to hear it. It sounds absurd, but it's true. Satan has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ. They don't want to hear it. Number 3, some people offer militant opposition to the gospel, to the invite. Again, if you've tried to share the gospel very often with people, you know this is true because it happens. Some people get downright nasty about it because they don't want to hear it. Persecution has been a part of Christianity since the beginning. For 2,000 years, Christians have been persecuted because they have a message the world doesn't want to hear. In Acts 5, it says the apostles left the Sanhedrin rejoicing that they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name of Jesus. You know what they did? They just went right back out on the streets and started declaring that Jesus is the Christ. They just went right back to what they were doing. They just continued to proclaim that message, knowing that it might bring opposition to them. A few years ago, it's kind of an interesting situation. Kathy and I were handing out brochures for our Harvest Fest. And if you've ever been to one of our Harvest Festivals, it's simply meeting a community need. It's a service to the community, and there's almost nothing religious that goes on. It's just, hey, we're here to serve you, and that's what we want to do. And we were handing out some brochures, and there were some kids on the street in our neighborhood, and we said, hey, if your parents want an alternative, pass this on, ask them if you can come. And they said, okay. And we were walking on, and we were a couple blocks later, and this truck just roared up beside us, one of those really noisy ones without a muffler. And he roared up beside us, and he threw those papers out the window, and with a bunch of expletives said, leave your religious to yourself. Don't put it on my kids. And off he drove. And it just struck me as so strange because there wasn't even a chance to say, hey, we're serving your kids and there's nothing religious about this event. We're just there to serve you. But when he saw Village Church on there, that was his response to it. People sometimes are strong opposition to the gospel message and to the things of God's agenda. And we just need to expect that to be the case. And finally, maybe this one relates to us more than any other. Some people come, but they come with selfish motives. They come with their own agenda. They want to come to God on their terms, not on his terms. I'll come, but I want to do it myself. I don't want to admit it's all you. I don't want to admit that I'm helpless. I'll come, but I'm going to wear my own clothes. I'm not going to change in to yours. I want a part of me to be this. This is what's at the heart of the prosperity gospel that's so prevalent in America and so dangerous. I'll come as long as there's something in it for me. That's the heart of the prosperity gospel, and that's what's taught. You come because there's something here for you. And never is there talk about persecution or suffering or taking up one's cross. It's all about God's going to give you something if you come. We want to hear the blessings, but we don't want to hear the cost. I want to come to the feast and enjoy the food, but I'm not going to change into his clothes. I want to wear my own. I want to come with my agenda on my terms. It's also in the same way what's at the heart of the liberal churches, particularly when they say anyone can come as you are, you don't have to change. Just come. Stay that way. Jesus says, come as you are. I'll love you and I will change you. That's the message of the gospel. And as we said a few weeks ago, some people say, can't we love sinful people? Well, we can. Jesus loves them just the way they are. But he loves them so much he doesn't want to leave them there. He loves them so much he wants to conform them to the image of himself. And that's the call of the gospel. Don't think you can come and never change. Come knowing that God will give you the clothes and he will change you. It's his agenda. But even more subtly than that, it impacts us sometimes because we simply look to church for what we want. Isn't that true? We look at a church as, how can that church serve me? Mark DeYoung was the director of Christian formation at Northwest Christian College in Orange City, Iowa, when my daughter attended there. And when he first became in that position, they did a big interview in the college magazine. And it was interesting. They asked him a bunch of questions about ministering to college-age people. They asked him, what do people want? What do young people want in corporate? Try again. What do young people want in corporate worship? And what do they really need? And it was a lengthy answer he gave, but here's what he said in the middle of it. He said, we are a consumeristic culture. It's not just the young people, it's most of us. We show up for worship with the same consumeristic, market-to-me expectations that we take to Best Buy or to television programming. We want me-centered worship that caters to our individuality and our entertainment preferences. But when it comes to worship, the greatest satisfaction comes when it's not about us. When we lose ourselves in experiencing the height of God's glory in worship, we experience the height of our design as humans. And then we really get what we need. Isn't that true of all of us? It's not just young people. We come to worship with what we want sometimes rather than serving God. Dr. Joel Scandrett wrote an article called Holy to the Core in Christianity Today. Here's what he said about the American church. So endemic is our narcissism that many American Christians see Jesus as little more than a means of augmenting their own sense of self, whether it be as a health and prosperity or as a well-being issue. In either case, the self is allowed to continue as its own spiritual center, rather than taking its proper place in orbit around Jesus, who is the true center. Isn't that an amazing thing? He says as American Christians, we're all somewhat narcissistic because it's about our well-being. It's about our health and our prosperity. But really it's about the King and his agenda. That's what the true religion is about. You have an invitation. You have one of the most amazing invitations, the most amazing invitation that's ever been offered. As someone who in no way deserves it, you've been offered an invitation to the marriage supper of the King's Son. It's an eternal feast with no sorrow or crying, with no sickness or death. And yet so often people say no. All you have to do is come. Everything has been prepared. Come to Jesus. Come to his agenda. Next week we're going to talk about the heart of the King's agenda as the closing to